Hello and welcome to the 13th episode of the Mike McNair Revolutionary Strategy Series. Today we have a full panel. We've got 4 guests today. We have all the way from sunny, warm Utah is Oil Drum Derek.
Hello, and today we're going to talk about workers' government and the mass strike and other things that sort of kind of work, but not really.
Excellent. Now then, we're flying across the East Coast up to upstate New York / posh Connecticut, where Lexi is in her boudoir. Lexi, how's it going?
Going pretty well. As people will know from New York, upstate New York is a distant, far off land, and I'm towards New York City, comfortably at the seat of bourgeois culture, and in its calming radioactive glow.
So you're at the periphery of New York core?
I am, yeah. That's where I originate from.
As opposed to the Outlands.
That's right. So although I'm not proper, Brooklyn royalty on the podcast left, it is in my blood.
Are you an Islander?
No. My immediate family comes from Florida, and they, my mom did a reverse retirement, reverse Jewish retirement, where instead of, growing old and going to, Florida, she was in Florida and moved to New York.
Okay.
Very good. I once went down a river in upstate New York in a dinghy, and there was a bear in the river eating fish.
Holy shit!
Near us. And we thought it was a dog, because it was quite far away. And so we're like, is that a dog? And then we got closer and closer. We're like, oh no, that's a wild bear. And we're like, what do we do? And we were like, oh, let's go up and have a look. But it pissed off by the time we got there, which is quite lucky, I think.
Yeah.
But,
yeah.
I mean, luckily that's black bear's normal reaction is to get the fuck away from you, but they'll mess your day up. So
that's true, they would.
Yeah. See, that's why I don't go upstate. That's why I don't go upstate, Tom.
We got kicked off of a fucking. We got kicked off of a federal kind of park camping place.
How do you get
nighttime alcohol related proclivities?
How Irish are you?
Yeah. Come on, that's solid. That's real solid. I'm a fan.
It's pretty hard to get kicked off of one as well. Like it's next to impossible. But there was about 8 of us, and we went crazy. And people were asleep in fires and stuff like this. And then the next morning, the ranger came over to us and kicked us out. And we were all in terrible state. And at 8 o'clock in the morning, there was this Christian fucking youth party beside us, up with their guitar, singing songs. And we were laying strewn about, covered in our own vomit, literally.
Oh, no.
And urine stained all over ourselves, pissed ourselves. And
Tom, I don't know if I've ever been that drunk, collectively in my life. If I took all the alcohol I drank and put it in me right now, I don't know if I'd get there.
I have, but only in other countries. So.
That's different. Yeah, it's different alcohol.
It doesn't count when you're in Korea. That's what I was told. All right.
Soju doesn't count.
Okay. And also then we got Puya returning again today for a second sojourn at Mike McNair. Puya, how's it going?
Very good, Tom. How's it going with you?
Good. Right, let's crack into it. The workers' government slogan. Now, for me, there was 2 important parts in this. I really like the first part of this chapter where he goes on about talking about what would be the lay of the land post, say, a communist revolution, and how we could expect the political landscape to change, much like, say, after, say, the American revolution, the US Revolution, there was, you know, a kind of a death of any kind of Tory or royal parties, and the same in, say, Ireland or somewhere where it's politically impossible to be like for the British Army or for the British state to be like a pro-British party. And he's going to talk about how the politics could change after it. Also, he talks about organizational forms. So what's wrong with, say, the Soviets as a way to run the country, and there's some other stuff thrown in there too, but there is some of the stuff that I found very good. Will we crack right in and start doing a bit of reading? Lexi, do you want to read all this first page and we'll take it? I think it's all pretty good.
Yeah, fuck it, let's do it.
Maybe we'll break it in.
Break out my
it in
reading
bits.
voice.
Yeah, if it lends itself to a break, we'll have a break in it.
All right, let's do it. Okay, so so I'm just going to read this. I love this. The quote workers government slogan. Okay. In chapter 2, I argued that the strategy of the mass strike founded on the need of the society for a central coordinating authority. The mass strike wave and the strike committees it throws up break down the existing capitalist framework of authority, but do not provide an alternative. The resulting dislocation of the economy leads to pressure for a return to the capitalist order. The Kautskian Center solution to this problem was to build up the United Workers' Party and its associated organizations, trade unions, etc., as an alternative center of authority. This gradual process could find its expression in the electoral results of the Workers' Party. When it became clear that the Workers' Party had a majority of the popular vote, the Workers' Party would be justified in taking power away from the capitalists and implementing its minimum program. If elections were rigged so that a popular majority did not produce a parliamentary majority, or legal or bureaucratic constitutional mechanisms were used to stop the Workers' Party implementing its program, the use of the strike weapon, force, etc., would be justified. So that's a special one for you Americans. In implementing its program, however, in Kautsky's view, the Workers' Party would use the existing state bureaucratic apparatus. This merely reflected the need of a modern society for professional administration. In this respect, Kautsky, in his most revolutionary phase, had already broken from the democratic republicanism of Marx's writings on the Commune and Critique of the Gotha Program, and Engels' comments in Can Europe Disarm?
Okay. Derek, do you want to have a discussion, talk there a bit about like what is wrong with Kautsky or right with Kautsky kind of not talking about just taking over the modern state instead of smashing it?
Well, I mean,
or is this language? Is this just language?
I actually think it actually is significantly different. And Engels kept on chastising Kautsky for this. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yes. Although I would add that McNair is correct that Engels, towards the end of his life, while never abandoning insurrection, does end up putting a little more faith into possibly a Workers' Party having their hands on the levers of power as part of a greater revolutionary process than he would have normally allowed throughout his life.
I got the feeling towards the end of his life, Engels thought that it could be done by Democratic majority, but there would have to be some sort of force at hand, both to smash the state from within, and also to be defensive, because he figured that as soon as they actually have power, there would be extra constitutional means applied. And Kautsky carries that over, right? But what?
Yeah. Although Engels is more comfortable with an offensive than Kautsky.
Yeah. But I want to go back to Kautsky's main point about the mass strike problem, because when I read this in The Road to Power, like, it kind of blew my mind, and I was like, why have I never thought of this before? Because I was one of those mass strikers, economic revolution first people. And then I thought about it, and I'm like, wait, if we have a strike and there's no opposing power structure, what's going to happen? Well, McNair actually doesn't state this here; it states it elsewhere. But like, basically, the capitalists will out. You probably won't win because the capitalists have the resources. They'll starve you out, and we've actually seen this in even limited strikes in real life. So, so that's a real limit to view. But let's say you do win, you also don't have any alternative power structure. And it's funny because I was thinking about in that second paragraph in this, before we get to where Kautsky's wrong, there's so much modern lefty misunderstanding addressed in one paragraph. So what that second paragraph is the actual like pre-Lenin, although Lenin's the person who calls it this, strategy of dual power. And the dual power strategy is literally like you have all these alternate forms of association, which could basically serve functions of the state. Now, this has real limited use when the state's actually working because the state has more resources than you by definition. But the reason why you have this is when you have the revolution or when you have the strike or even the democratic, the quote unquote democratic revolution, when those state organisms fight back, you need alternate authority structures to contend with them. And having seen this in, I don't know, real life, because I was in Egypt right after when the counter revolution happened, that was a case of where they had to rely on all the existing institutions with most of the same existing functionaries, and also it didn't help that the Muslim Brotherhood was kind of incompetent. That they could be both sabotaged from within and have their own incompetency throw their democratic revolution to the wind, and then react to that, they would have executive overreach, which would then give legitimacy to deposing them. All right, and that's what happened, and that's perfectly predictable from what Kautsky's talking about here. And that's not even a socialist revolution, right? That's just a kind of a quasi-bourgeois democratic one against the military junta with some reactionary elements involved. And like, you see the same thing play out. So Kautsky's right on that. Where things get weird is he just seems to think that you could use the bureaucratic constitutional program, not only solely defensively, but that you don't really have to dismantle the state because there's a lot of risk to dismantling the state. Right? Kautsky points this out over and over again. There's a ton of risk to this. There's all kinds of infrastructure and things that would lead to reactionary backlash and failure. And again, we can kind of see this actually happen in Russia, although the Reds won. What really gave the White Army an ability to recruit was before the NEP really took off and the Soviets, the Bolsheviks were really struggling to come up with a viable economic program. But if they never dismantled the state at all and its essential institutions, its logics have a kind of teleal, they're designed to produce one kind of thing. And they were designed in liberal democracy, mostly in service of bourgeois capital, and they're not gonna really work that well otherwise. And I mean, arguably, one of the chief sins of the Bolsheviks is they didn't smash the state enough.
Well, that's the thing about the Bolsheviks that are frightening, is that they did as close to dismantling the state as you could hope for in communist history, and then sort of de facto recreate it.
Because they create most of the structures of the society that they were from. Did
they not just directly take them over as well?
They did. A lot of times they would dismantle them, and then like when it failed, they would just kind of reinstitute it. It's kind of like de-Ba'athification in Iraq. It was the same sort of process. Oh, we can't really do this. Shit. Well, at least find some people who are willing to be loyal, or whatever, after we are willing to liquidate their families if they don't do it, to become functionary bureaucrats. This didn't happen as much in Russia as it did in some other places, but it did happen. And the other thing is, a lot of the forms of government started resembling forms under the Tsarist government. And the liberal historians point this out all the time. And, right. A lot of Marxists get really pissy when you point this out. But it is true, for example, that the Ukraina the NKVD, particularly after Iron Felix was not in charge, they started looking more and more alike.
Yeah, but like liberals and especially like liberal conservatives will paint this to the like an Orientalist picture of a semi-Asiatic, Russian national character that's just seething with despotism, as opposed to
what? Like Britain, where the same thing happened after its.
Well, right, but that's like the straw man of this argument. But the stronger form of this argument, I think, should give us some sympathy for the orthodox Marxists that are like, dude, what are you going to do when you smash the Democratic Republic? Like, what do you even do? Like, and maybe we don't like the kind of limited bourgeois democratic republics that we have, but the classical Marxist tradition did see, bourgeois democracy as democratic in some important sense. And Kautsky, in his most revolutionary days, I think the reason that he was able to sound like a Marxist is that he didn't really consider the representative organs of the state to properly be the state.
Right.
Like, when Marx and Engels are talking about the state, say in the 1850s or something, like that's an entirely, smaller thing to the state today, you would have thought. Like there was no Ministry of Health, no Ministry probably of Transport, no Ministry of this, that, and the other. A lot of it was more about collecting taxes, war, the cops, if they existed, and the army, and like that's what. So when they're talking about the state, that's what they were talking about.
I don't know that I totally believe that though, Tom. Because he does throw. I mean, the reason why I say that is Marx actually did seem to know what was going on in America, where there was at the state level, not at the federal level, and this is still kind of true, something like a welfare state, because he keeps on talking about Lassallean talking points, and Lassallean welfare.
Like it's like the critique of the Gotha program. It's that same thing where he's not in favor of tying the a welfare state to the state.
Exactly. It's interesting. There are some things that people miss. Like I used to point out that while like it wasn't like that Marx would have supported charter schools or whatever, or the privatization of education. He thought like making other than licensing teachers, which he explicitly mentions is okay. He thought that like trusting the state to do all your educational functions was insane. Like it was like a grounds for hyper propaganda. And it's interesting that like that's the Kautsky program drops all that. And Engels and Kautsky, Engels, I would say I had someone who was like cheerleading the ARFIT program, and interesting, both communist and social democrats I know were getting into this. And I pointed out Engels endorsed it, but cautiously. He wrote an ARFIT critique, just like there was a Gerfert critique. And he kept on talking about how they misunderstood socialization as nationalization, and that socialism as a function of a national state. And he just chastised Kautsky for it relentlessly. And then Kautsky wrote The Road to Power, which played a lot of those elements down. And interestingly enough, a lot of the Bolshevik fanboys today and a lot of the social democrat anti-Bolshevik fanboys today actually ignore a lot of Engels's critique of the ARFIT program. And I think this is actually directly relevant here, because the idea that you could use all the state functionaries and just like democratically control them without changing them very much, just change their orientation. I think Marx would say, the democratically control them, you actually have to fundamentally break them in a way that doesn't look like what Kautsky was actually arguing for. Because Kautsky's conception of socialism does seem like Lassalleanism. And I know for our listeners who aren't up on the nuances of socialist history, that sounds like I'm just using jargon, but Lexi, can you feed into that a little bit?
Yeah, so I follow McNair as using Lassalle as a sort of signpost for the right socialist strategy of buddying up with anti-bourgeois forces like that are kind of previous ruling classes. So Ferdinand Lassalle, as a hero of the German labor movement, famously was seeking Otto von Bismarck, the great Russian Prussian militarist, and Prussian being a forerunner to Germany here, trying to get his help in fighting capitalism, essentially. And this is like a right-wing social strategy par excellence that we associate with Lassalle, which maybe is a bit of a sad way to remember him because he seemed like a solid dude. Does that plug any holes there?
I think there's a little bit more than that, though. It's not just the signing up with the anti-bourgeois elements. It's also Lassallean's clear usage of the forms of the bourgeois state in ways that weren't even as radical as like the bourgeois state in America is. That was Marx's critique, not McNair's.
I mean, it's not even just the bourgeois state. It's a aristocratic militarist state. It's a pre-bourgeois state that he's willing to align with in order to curtail bourgeois forces from even like forming in a proper state like the Weimar Republic or something.
Yeah, and you know what? So, I would say a lot of anti-imperialism actually does this explicitly. So
yes, that's why it's a strategy that has outlasted the time, and Lassallean is the way that as I say it, but maybe we should find another term.
Why did you say that, Derek? That anti-imperialism does this, like with aligning with like
the rabbit
hole. Assad and people?
Well, because a lot of times there's talk of national bourgeoisie versus comprador bourgeoisie, and they actually see the comprador, aka the international bourgeoisie, as more repressive than the national one, which is nutty. And the idea that certain you'll see these socialist governments, particularly in Africa, use like tribal rights, like tribal land right claims and stuff, as their grounds for allegiance with kind of old aristocracy or and the idea there is like, it comes from the greater contradiction logic of Mao, but Lassalle had already kind of justified that. And a lot of the legitimate objections to anti-imperial politics are not really about anti-imperialism, although some of them are just chauvinism. But some of the more good faith ones point out that you keep on homogenizing these prior groups and pretending like there's no class struggle within a society, that there's just the imperial versus the imperial capitalist and somehow everybody else, even if those everybody else are pre-bourgeois, so that if there's no bourgeois form, there's no proper workers form either. And you're conflating like the dispossessed or the oppressed with the workers. And you're conflating oppression levels as if it's just one homogenous national whole, as opposed to a very complicated society. And while Marx did kind of legitimize national struggles, this idea that it was in itself going to just put in there and that was going to be your primary means for revolution, that's like starting at step 5 back and calling it a day, because one of Marx's points about the anti-imperial struggles is they actually resemble the anti-imperial struggles in Europe, which were against, I don't know, the fucking Habsburgs. And it wasn't even capitalist imperialism. And so the analogies very early Marx actually even thought that imperialism was good because it was spreading Enlightenment values to the rest of the world. And it took, Marx moved away from that later.
Yeah, but I think that anti-imperial situation, like for instance, if we're talking about the American state's encroachment on Hawaii, it kind of makes sense to align yourself with the Hawaiian monarchy and maybe to look at the previous class structures as maybe something idyllic. And then I'm talking about for the Hawaiian population, like that. That's probably the strongest case for Lassallean politics. And you, as a communist, with avoiding chauvinism and trying to like root out chauvinist versions of this argument, like you kind of have to make the argument that a Lasallian, strategy is a losing strategy.
What
Anyway.
you have to point out is if what would Hawaii have done if it had maintained independence? It would have developed its own capitalist class under leadership of the aristocracy, or it would have been taken over by somebody else. So it's the only real two viable options.
Well, I mean, like
they would have created a lot more good kind of ukulele music.
Instead of the shitty hipster like white people ukulele music we have now. Yeah,
correct.
I mean, I get it. When you look at Hawaii or the Native Americans, why you'd feel that way. But
it might have been better. It might have been better for them to have their own bourgeoisies. Like it's not hard to see why.
I actually think it would have been better, but they would have been caught in the international struggle, and it would have ended looking very much. The example you wanted the example that's perfect for this, Japan.
Yeah. Okay. No. That's it's solid. But if you're Japanese, you might prefer that.
Well, of course you do, until you also try to do it to other people. I mean, that's the other thing. Mm-hmm. It's like the idea that a lot of Marxists have, and this is relevant to this. But this is a rabbit hole that we warned you about. But the idea that a lot of Marxists have that like you could arrest this development once the exposure to capitalism has happened. There's no evidence for that anywhere on Earth. None.
Yeah.
Like. And then this idea that self-autonomy would be good, but the market's still going to dictate. And particularly in a nation like Hawaii or a nation like Japan, where your isolations and your resource limited, it's going to dictate even more because you couldn't be self-sufficient.
Okay, we're getting a bit off track.
You think so?
Yeah.
I'm very interested in the Hawaiian example, I must admit. But
yeah, me too.
I remember listening.
I'm holding my tongue.
I remember listening to on a kind of semi-related note. I was only taking the piss there about the Hawaiian with the ukulele music, but there was I was listening to. Dude. No, I wasn't trying to be racist.
No. You're not wrong at all, though. Like in I don't know, in Brooklyn or in Oakland or something, there's tons of white people doing ukulele music. That's all.
Yeah, I would totally love like the expansion of indigenous traditions and the modernity where they got to develop their own commercialized shit as opposed to our versions of their commercialized shit.
Correct. I was listening to BBC Radio 4 about 10-15 years ago, and they had this program called from our foreign correspondent, and they basically have foreign correspondent in China or any place it could be, and they're usually like these toughened old journalist hacks. And they had this one guy on, and he was one of those. He was a hardened like war journalist or something, and for some reason he was off in the South Pacific. And he got to this like island where there was like, I don't know, a few hundred or I don't know how many people, not very many people. And it was really, really difficult to get to. It's not on any trading route or anything. And like you have to literally go there, and specifically to go there. And it takes you like 3 or 4 or a week sailing to get to this goddamn island. And he got there and he was saying like, you could tell it in his voice. He was nearly crying. He was saying like, this is the most perfect society. He said like, everybody, when they have their first child, they have to give it to somebody else who can't have children. And so everybody has like all of their kids are all kind of really communal. And they were interviewing like the chief guy or something. He was saying like, what's your biggest problem at the moment? And he says, well, with the youth, it's the ukulele music is kind of getting out of hand. It's like they don't do any of our old songs. Everything is just with the ukuleles. And it was like that was the greatest social problem they had.
Holy shit.
I was like, God, I want to go to this goddamn island. It sounds like the greatest place ever. They're basically just all living in communism, like so far off the beaten track with ukulele communism.
That's their means of production of ukuleles.
How did they get anything out there?
Create verse.
Yeah, it sounded like not very interesting how they give the first child to somebody else. Isn't that like a very strange concept?
That's a remarkable custom. Like that obviously would build some kind of solidarity that wouldn't be possible otherwise. Also, from my perspective, hard to imagine instituting something like that in this society.
Well, yeah, it's fascinating. It's fascinating how all the Evo Psych people point out that would say that doesn't make any sense, and then you're like, yo, it totally does, because you tend to share DNA with your kinship group. So like, and your kinship group is usually really large. So even from the most radically reductionist, which I think it's probably wrong anyway, it would still make sense. But why does no one do it? Well, there's other reasons, right? Like, it has nothing to do with genetics.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of things that don't make sense in Evo Psych world that humans do.
Like everything.
Like
it's all goddamn rubbish. How about that?
Yeah. Or like,
is that a hot take, or is that just like the scientific community's take?
No, it's actually it's pretty divided on in comparative biology, which is actually the only field that could probably make a solid judgment on it. But most people think a lot of Evo Psych is just those stories. But like, I have to admit, I think conceptually Evo Psych has to be kind of baseline true, but I've never seen any conclusions drawn from it that stood up to like any comparative biology.
Well, I mean, it's not just your genes, though. Also your environment.
Well, the whole genetic environment distinction, when you think about genetic triggers, is really fucking like not even introducing epigenetics. Like it's just not that valid, right? Because half your genes won't manifest.
We're not going into genetics. Cutting it there, right? Sorry.
Oh, excuse me. Like scientific material selects tables, but not actual science. Got it.
Correct. And wooden tables, Derek. Wooden tables.
The Irish the Irish rustication paradigm. All power to Soviets.
All power to Soviets. Now here, I kind of wanted to get back a little bit. I know we've been off on a half-hour tangent, but I wanted to get back a little bit towards this idea of smashing the state. It would seem to me like that when we were talking earlier in the book, how they were talking about how the state in its most crude form is a armed group of men. And I think definitely in a revolutionary period, you kind of need to break up definitely that part of the state, or, and completely realign it quite quickly. But I think parts of the modern state, like say, like the social welfare system that are around now, like that is not something that's easily smashed immediately. Like it would seem to me in a revolutionary transitional period, like to get all of those functions that are currently in the state and change how they operate and make them largely democratic is kind of like not the emergency smash the state stuff. That's more of a kind of like implementing what you want. And look, just like say implementing a planned economy, you can't just smash the entire economy and then the planned economy will work just immediately. It's like there'll be 10, 15-year programs. They're very, very complex programs. So I think the idea of smashing the state has to be kind of teased apart.
Well, this is interesting because I think one of the traditional Marxist answers to it, and one the anarchists picked up on, is that you subsume those functions before you take power through mutual aid societies or whatever. But that only works at a level of development that we're not at anymore, right? Like that does seem to be the elephant in the room for that strategy. So somebody was like, we can build. I was literally talking to somebody who I respect deeply, actually, but they were telling me that we needed to have like workers' healthcare clinics and stuff without licensed doctors. And I'm like, that's not gonna go well.
Like say for example, like payment systems, right? Let's say in the morning, there's a revolution and fucking hell, PayPal and the clearing houses decide, or we shut them down. The next, like that day, the economy shuts down, right? And it's not like you're going to be able to democratize or change the basis of how all that works overnight. It's just an impossibility, the complexity of those systems.
Right, which is why systems like labor tokens are always considered even though I have my issues with labor tokens, that is a transitional form, because that's something you can start substituting in to phase the other out.
Sorry, I just have to invite Puya again. He's kind of gone missing, so let me see. 1 second. Okay. So so I think we've kind of done that page to death. Will we move on a little wee bit and see what we got?
I think we might want to try to move on, yes.
Yeah, we can do this forever. All right. Can I read this?
Yeah, we don't have to read everything. Like, I have some stuff underlined here that I thought was good, but sure, we can read everything. I don't mind.
No, what do you think? What do you want to focus in on there? Let's focus on
I was thinking that we could go from maybe this paragraph here and read these couple of paragraphs here.
Okay, that's what we'll do then. I've already argued in Chapter 2 that the belief that all power to the Soviets represented an alternative political authority was mistaken. The Russian Soviets came closer than any other historical body of workers' councils to creating a national political authority. They did so because until 1925, the Mensheviks and SR leadership continued to believe that they had the majority in the Soviets nationwide, and one which could serve as a support for the provisional government pending the creation of a constituent assembly proper, i.e. a parliamentary democracy. No other reformist or bureaucratic mass party has made such a mistake of using its own resources to develop a national coordination of workers' councils. So far, left formations or alliances have proved able to create such a coordination against the will of the existing mass parties.
Like, that's an important freaking point there. Like, no other reformist or bureaucratic mass party has made the same mistake of using its own resources to develop a national coordination of workers' councils. Like, maybe somebody like the British Labour Party under Corbyn or something, maybe they could actually, maybe they'd be up for doing it. But like, god damn it, the Labour Party under Blair, could you imagine the goddamn thing happening?
Right. I was actually thinking about this. Everyone always tells me that there are workers' co-ops that have dual power functions in Venezuela that work this way, and the Venezuela apologists do. And I just find that it can't be true because there wouldn't be a strong executive in such a system, right? There pretty much couldn't be.
Yeah, I'm waiting to see how the historical record shakes out on that, because the claims would be extremely significant if true, but you know what the rest of that is.
What's the big if true?
So I McNair has a wide enough understanding of history to make such a sweeping claim. I wonder if there is an asterisk to that.
The claim is right that it's not just that no reformists are bureaucratic mass party. Now that's interesting, because bureaucratic mass party is vague. That's vague, but it's big. Because were the Bolsheviks a bureaucratic mass party?
Arguably,
right.
Depends. Mass party. I mean, this wouldn't cover, let's say, the Swiss, cantons, like the old democratic form, or maybe even the Hungarian diet or something like that.
Right, but those are pre-capitalist forms too, right?
Exactly.
How about Vermont?
Yeah, that's a pre-capitalist form too, Tom.
Yeah. Right here. Let me read this paragraph, because this is a bit of a bomb of a paragraph, I think. Nor could so he's talking about Sovnarkom, which is what was Sovnarkom? It was
basically the replacement executive.
Okay, and it was made up of who? People's commissioners. Okay, and who are they?
I think the way that the old Soviet system worked was that the councils had I don't know, a section of councils could send one delegate to this greater, more important council, which could then send then had another order of delegate system, and then there eventually was the central the central body, which had the
Oh, yeah.
representative of the councils of the, all the way down. And that
this
in
was
practice, yeah.
Go on. This was a thing that Cockshot was critiquing from a kind of statistical point of view, that if you had a small majority at one of the lower levels, you'd end up with basically a massive, totally dominated majority at the top levels. On how they organize it.
Yeah, I would really love to see what Cockshot has to think about this, because I'm kind of partial to his choice by
He
lot.
has a critique.
Mm-hmm.
He's written a critique of this book. You can find it.
And this is one of the things he critiques, I think, the most, actually. But
yeah. But anyway, let me read this paragraph.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, Puya, what do you want to say?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was just gonna say that. Yeah, I think Cockshot has his vision for socialism is something I find pretty agreeable. Yeah,
even though I disagree. Stage 1.
Yeah, even though I disagree with obviously I think his economics is awful, but his other work is pretty good. Anyway, what were you saying?
It is pretty good. Yeah, it is pretty good. My favorite part as well of that one, what is it, Towards a New Socialism or whatever, is how you can reduce the number of toilets by living in commune. I particularly like that bit. I don't know, it's such a strange thing to bring up, where he was talking about the waste of number of toilets. It's like you couldn't pick a worst thing to actually say to people. I know what we could do. We could all share our jacks. And then it'd be brilliant.
Did he use queuing theory? I bet he used queuing theory to see what the utilization rate of toilets is.
Man, I went to a Catholic boarding school, and at night there was 3 toilets between 100 people. I'm telling you, you don't want that. You'd be standing on your tippy toes in an inch full of piss. Absolutely terrible.
See what you need though is just an efficient piss trough and 3 toilets. That would take care of most of your problems.
That would, but the toilets themselves are so dirty, Derek, that you wouldn't be able to sit down on the toilet, so you'd have to kind of levitate to do a dump, and frequently people would miss, and their dump would land on the rim, and you'd have to go to the drag, and there'd be just a long stool just lining its way around the rim of the toilet.
You know what? Now that I'm thinking about it, maybe we should just double down on bourgeois liberty, and everyone has a self-cleaning robot toilet in their room or something. Because I don't think collective bathrooms are a good idea anymore.
We could do some modeling. We could do some serious modeling of this.
Well, you could also design something more efficient than a toilet, because living in places that don't have them, there are more efficient ways to poo. But,
right. You could beam the matter out of yourself, like in Star Trek.
Or you could just do those fun squat toilet things that they have in East Asia, and get your core strength really good.
Yeah, they have a lot.
God,
I had to squat for 5 years in boarding school, where you were just living in fear of the toilet. I swear to God, I don't ever want to squat again. It was so bad. One day I was annoying this guy. I took the piss out of him, and he was older than me, a big guy, and he ran into the jacks after me. And I jumped into the jacks and I closed the door. There was only 3 for the whole floor. And he jumped on top of the bowl of his other toilet so we could climb over to beat the crap out of me. But the entire bowl shattered, and he got his foot landed right in a big lump of shit, and all the water and the piss flowed all over the toilet, and then we had 3 toilets between 200. The whole floor wasn't able to use them. That's my hatred of. I'm going to try and read this. We've been trying to actually start this paragraph for about 25 minutes. This has got to be the worst podcast of all time.
Or the best. All right.
I think Robert Fourier would be really proud of the way we've routed our ADD into something productive. Was it Charles for you? God, yeah, Robert for you. Anyway, we're done. I'm done.
Maximum toilet theory. Let's talk about Sovnarkom.
One more before we start. One more, but they had this really strange rule in boarding school, right? That at 10 o'clock your lights were out, and then you weren't allowed to go to the toilet. No one was allowed to go to the toilet until 11 o'clock.
Oh, what did you do?
Going for a piss. You wouldn't. You just sometimes you piss in a bottle or a sink if you were lucky to have one in your
Sink
in your room.
No.
But what they used to do, actually, do you know, like people used to do, is they used to piss into like an empty bottle, you know, like a Coke bottle, a big one or something, and they would use it as a hot water bottle because it was so cold.
Yeah.
Oh.
Like they would use it to keep themselves warm?
Yeah. No, I've lived in places where that's common practice, actually.
Where?
And when it gets super fucking cold and some of the places in Southeast Asia during the winter, because it's not cold enough for most of the year, to necessitate actually having a heater.
Yeah.
They use hot water bottles and they use these little heat packs. But when you run out of that, or when you really have to pee and you can't go to the outhouse, because some of these places don't have indoor centralized plumbing, you pee in a plastic container, seal it up, and use it as a hot water bottle. Use it to keep your hands warm.
Well, I'm glad to hear it wasn't just me.
You're not the only weirdo. It occurs to many. It occurs to many people that urine is warm.
So warm.
Maximum efficiency in communism, people. All heating will be done with urine.
With your own urine.
Oh,
you'll walk around with self-urinating clothes.
God, you know the geodesic. Who's the guy who did the geodesic dome? And then we'll get back on top. What's his name?
Christ, I don't remember.
Engelbert Huckerbrinker or something like that.
Yeah, I mean the guy who actually came up with that. He was like this technocrat utopian, but he actually has long tracks about more efficient ways to process waste. And it wasn't like everybody gets to share a toilet, but it was just like the future sounded like techno composters is what it sounded like. He's like, why are you wasting all that nitrogen? I'm like, yeah, why are you wasting all that nitrogen?
Yeah, all I know is
his name is Buckminster Fuller.
Yeah, it's Buckminster Fuller. Yeah. There's whole like long descriptions of what he thinks future toilets would be like. So it's not just Cockshot who's had this idea, although I think Fuller's discussions were actually probably better.
Yeah, I'm just going to say it right now. I don't want to have to deal with the bathroom system designed by Paul Cockshot for a number of reasons.
Yeah. Ooh.
Okay.
All right, let's move on.
Let's keep going. Okay, I am going to read this. If it fucking kills me, I'm going to read this paragraph. Okay, everybody shut the fuck up.
Okay.
Right. Sorry. I can blame you. I just talked about my fucking boarding school. It
was quite a long time.
Once I get started, I can't stop. 5 years of fucking hell. Okay.
Sounds like hell, Tom. It really does.
That's the good stuff. Like, that's the good shit. Okay.
Okay, wait. I'm gonna read it. Nor could Sovnarkom base itself fully on the Soviets and their militia aspect. As I have said, the Soviets did not attain a governing character, but met episodically rather than in a continuous session. The militia proved insufficient to hold back either the Germans or the whites, so that Sovnarkom was forced to create a regular army and with it a bureaucratic apparatus. The problem of authority over the state bureaucracy was unsolved. Lenin and the Bolsheviks fell back on the forms of authority in their party, and as these proved a problem in the Civil War, almost unthinkingly militarized their party and created a top-down bureaucratic regime.
You know what's funny about this though? This same problem actually came up in the context of the American Revolution, and frankly, and I know I'm going to get shit for saying this, George Washington handled it better.
Yeah, it's true.
Ooh,
it's really true.
The leader actually refused to militarize the even in the context of rebellions and civil war, refused to militarize the executive structure along the lines of the military. Interestingly, it took a military leader not to do it, because, and this is something I've thought about a lot, because we talk about party structures, but almost all the party structures are post Brest. Somebody can actually pronounce shit, huh?
Brest-Litovsk.
But yeah, Brest-Litovsk Treaty actually screwed everything up for everybody. I actually do think the left comms along Duvay's lines have a point when they point out that pretty much when the left SRs broke with the Bolsheviks, and there was no attempt of expansion because of the Brest-Litovsk Treaty, that things were pretty much done. They were going to go to where they went.
Yeah, like I just think this idea that he says here about the Soviets not being in continuous session, like that's really fundamental. Like if you're talking about organizational forms, if you look in the bourgeois state, the cabinet or the House of Representatives or the stuff, like they're always meeting, they're always there to be able to discuss whatever the hell is going down in the country. Like,
well, that's not true in the United States, actually, but the executive's always meeting, which actually probably is why the executive's more and more powerful over time.
Like, it's not just, I'm not trying to be specific. Like, it depends where you are and what's meeting. But even like, it's not like they meet once a month, right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
every day of the week. And if things come on, you look at in Brexit now, basically the Parliament has been in nearly full-on session, like sometimes for like nearly a month or two, every single day, 12, 14-hour days, like really crazy hours, that when it's needed, like the organizational structure is based upon the need. And I think like, so this idea of the Soviets being able to rule, like unless he's talking here about this, the Soviets themselves, the Sovnarkoms, or the top layer of it, didn't really, it looks like, reflect the bottom layers that well.
And it couldn't, because if the top layer did, like the top layer would have to not, it wouldn't be able to create a bureaucratic apparatus, because it would all have to work constantly to be a part of the workers' government, right? Like that's sort of the issue here.
Well, I don't know if, like, you can imagine just the representatives getting taken off. I think it's like, say if there was a massive change among, say, the bottom base, and the way Sovnarkom was based, like, it wouldn't reflect itself up to the top. And, like, what ended up, like, happening, you see, is that, the Soviets didn't control Sovnarkom, really. In reality, Sovnarkom probably just became its own goddamn bureaucratic apparatus,
right? And it definitely did. So they created an army that had a bureaucratic apparatus, and then the Bolsheviks, in response to that, had to further militarize their already kind of militarized party. And they had to maintain that during the Civil War, but that's what leads to the structures you see under Stalin, where you have and I mean, this is even true in like North Korea, excuse me. I got my Koreas flipped for a second.
Which one's a good one?
It doesn't matter. In North Korea, where there is actually like a fair amount of local democracy, but there was under feudal conditions in these places too. And then there's like, you have a communist leader claiming a holy bloodline, the Baekju bloodline, the Baekju Minhyuk. And so, like, yeah, it doesn't scale up. And that's kind of always been a problem with councilist left communism, is like they really haven't ever dealt with the scale up problem.
As well, like, does it not, if you think about the Soviets are just the workplaces, were there Soviets for everybody? Like, were there regional Soviets?
They were
like,
regional.
that included like women and old people and stuff like that.
No, they were
Or was it
workers'
just the
councils.
workers?
It was what it sounds like it was. Workers. I think there's a council of workers, a council in the German equivalent. There's a workers' council, a soldiers' council, and what was the third one? I forgot what the third one was.
Wait. So what? Workers, peasants, and soldiers?
Yeah, it's workers, peasants, and soldiers' councils, but the soldiers' councils couldn't react quick enough to deal with reaction. That's actually like kind of objectively true.
So like,
and they often killed their and this is a communist problem in general, but they killed a lot of their generals, which totally makes sense. The generals sucked. But then when they were up against the Freikorps, and this is the German situation, when they were up against the Freikorps, they had no one who was competent enough to outman them. I mean, this is kind of like, this is a problem. This is not something I've seen easily dealt with. So,
and I think it points to why the Orthodox Marxists were so squeamish about, destroying the existing democratic institutions. It's because of this problem of authority that pops up. And, it doesn't mean that you abandon revolution or an image of smashing the state necessarily. But it should give you some sympathy for why people do abandon that idea. This isn't just being a lib. There's a problem, right? Even if you're pro-revolutionary, you must grapple with it.
This is something where where you talk to, like, in the 90s when I would talk to modern anarchists and you would throw this stuff out, they'd be like, what do you mean? And I'm like, in an actual position, if you screw up on this, hundreds of thousands of people die. Like,
I've heard some serious, from some anarchists, I've heard some seriously, some ideas that I thought would be awful for, human lives.
Yeah.
With agriculture, especially.
Oh yeah, the basically.
Oh, you don't say.
Rustification and peasantification, or hunter-gatheringification of agriculture.
Yeah. Yeah, like we're just gonna have our little small plots of land. We're gonna have gardens or whatever.
Yeah. Anarcho-Malthusianism.
All right, all power to the Communist Party.
Let's do it. Okay, I'm going to read this one. Okay. The Second Congress of the Comintern in 1920, in its theses on the role of the Communist Party in the proletarian revolution, recognized this reality, that it is a party or parties and a government created by a parties or parties that compose an alternative form of authority to the capitalist order. But these theses over-theorized this recognition and carried with it organizational concepts that prevented the working class as a class exercising power through the Communist Party and communist government. Okay.
That's a pretty sick burn, actually.
Yeah.
I don't think people realize how big of a burn that is.
Yeah. And
go on.
Oh, I just want to say, so begins the part where he delivers on his promise to look at the 21 theses and like critically engage with them, like thesis by thesis, and even just like section of a thesis by section, like, which is something I haven't seen all that often done in anything like Good Faith. McNair is unique.
Yeah, people avoid this text even people who supposedly support it avoid this text like the plague.
Mm-hmm.
Like thesis 5, I think, is like transparently not true. Political power can only be. This is from the theses. Political power can only be seized and led by a political party and in no other way. Okay, I can think of plenty of counterexamples of that. And when the proletariat has a leader of an organized and tested party, would Rower mark to aims with a tangible, worked-out program for the next measures to be taken, not only at home but also foreign policy, will the conquest of political power not appear as an accidental episode, but serve as a starting point for the permanent communist construction of society by the proletariat?
Derek, can you read that second part less fast, because you went really
sure.
Yeah.
Only when the proletariat has a leader. a leader as a leader, an organized and tested party with well-marked aims and a tangible, worked-out program for the next measure to be taken, not only at home but also in foreign policy, with the conquest of political power not appeal as an accidental episode, but serve as a starting point for the permanent communist construction of society by the proletariat. Which, by the way, is self-refuting at this point for people who love this, because there was no permanent communist construction of society by the proletariat. It's not permanent. It doesn't exist anymore. So,
yeah. So you say earlier on, you said there's loads of ones that power sees power without a political party. Give us a few.
No, fuck. There was no political party in most of the bourgeois revolutions that led it. Not a singular party. There was not.
He says our parties as well. He says parties.
Well, no. That is what McNair says. That is not what the thesis says.
And so there's an ambiguity about the word party here that makes it kind of hard to talk about. And I think, Derek, you're maybe right to be skeptical of this equivocation. But the reason why I think McNair thinks that this stands up is because he looks at something like the American Revolution and broadly says there was like a Whig party system.
And, you know, I don't see any reason why political power can't be taken by something other than a party. You know, there's no, you know, theoretical reason why it can't be.
Yeah, because a party's not a junta, and juntas take over countries all the time.
The defensible form of this argument uses the previous Marxian conception of party and not the Kautskian conception of party that he's been working with for most of the book.
But we know that the thesis 5 is not working from the Marxian conception of party or the Kautskian conception of party. It's working from the Bolshevik conception of party.
Well, right,
correct. Okay,
so like I think McNair is not quoting this one entirely critically. I think he's trying to say that thesis 5 expresses the notion, like in part expresses the notion that you know there has to be an alternative form of authority to the capitalist order, and that it's parties and a government created by these parties that does so. Because so far he's been, you know, quite serious about taking up this question of, you know, an alternative order, right?
Yeah, but I mean, I actually think that the second clause transparently, like, let's talk about good, like reading the words as is, and not the words as we would like them to be. Well, and that's yeah. But McNair, I'm actually critiquing McNair here directly, and in no other way. It's just not true. That's not a true statement. It is not true.
True. Yeah. Yep. It might be kind of, you know, I suppose
some
like
probability.
You know, coups in imperial places, they happen without parties all the time, don't they? You know, the colonial places, they just get couped out of it. There's no party form there.
Military rulers take over all the time without a party form. Like,
I think there's probably, I think probably it. You know, you're right. It is true, but I think if we're talking about communist political power, I think that's maybe what the point is trying to get to.
Okay, I mean, I think
it's a fair read.
I'm not sure though, because he's making analogies to the liberal revolutions.
Right, and he's having McNair.
McNair.
But this is not McNair. This is a direct quote from the theses. I'm saying that in the theses, they say political power can only be seized. They're talking about communist political power now. I don't think they're talking about in all time ever.
That's true, and that's why I'm more interested maybe in what McNair is making of the thesis than the thesis itself. But Derek's intuition is also on point that we should be thinking about what the thesis means in context, and then also talk about what McNair is drawing out of it, because there is part of thesis 5 that he endorses.
Yeah.
Well, I think it would be more.
Just keep going. let's just keep going because we all know the different bits that we
Let
think.
Puya talk.
Okay,
No.
yeah, I think it might be a more correct statement if you just said, yeah, it might be a more correct statement if it said, it's more likely that a Communist Party will take power as if organized by a political party. You know, I think that would be a true statement. Or I
Yeah.
mean, that would be more.
It wouldn't take much to
Yeah.
make this a more conditional statement than it is.
Yeah. But like the Bolsheviks weren't one for conditional statements.
That's true.
Let's go along here and do thesis 9. The working class does not only need the Communist Party before and during the conquest of power, but also after the transfer of power into the hands of the working class. The history of the Communist Party of Russia, which has been in power for almost 3 years now, shows that the importance of the Communist Party does not diminish after the conquest of power by the working class, but on the contrary, grows extraordinarily.
How about should we read the next?
Yeah, we
paragraph?
should.
Okay, let me go.
I just want to say thesis 9, I think, is more problematic than thesis 5.
Well, I think they're both problematic, but thesis 9 is real problematic.
Well,
Yeah.
All right, now we can move on.
Let's move on, and we'll get to the end, and then we'll talk about the whole lot together. How about that?
Yeah.
Yep.
However, the political ground for these claims is the argument for the vanguard character of the party, theses 1 to 3. And a critical conclusion drawn is the need for strict Bonapartist centralism, iron military order in party organization, theses 13 to 17. I discussed both of these in chapter 5 and identified how they can serve to destroy the character of the party as one through which the proletariat can rule. In fact, both arguments are wholly unnecessary to the proposition that political party can only be seized and organized and led by a political party. Political power can only be seized, organized, and led by a political party. This proposition follows merely from the original argument of the Marxists against the Bakuninists and opponents of working class participation in elections. If the working class is to take power, it must lead the society as a whole. To do so, it must address all questions animating politics in the society as a whole and all its elements. To do so is become a political party, even when you call yourself an alliance or unity coalition or whatever, or a trade union, as the smaller revived Industrial Workers of the World group calls itself. To fail to do so is to fail even as an alliance or unity coalition. Now,
So there.
I'd like to say something here.
Yeah, that's a good
you
equivocation game, though. But anyway, go ahead.
I'd like to just say something before you boys get jump deep into it. Like I'm reading that
What
book.
about me?
Sorry, I mean in a non-gendered specific way. People. It is in Ireland we say boys for everyone.
Yeah.
So and lads the same. Girls calls each other lads. It's a bit weird, but
girls call each other dude out here.
they're the same kind of thing. Yeah. Which is weird, like because men don't call each other like
girl. I mean,
girl.
Gay dudes do.
Yeah, that's supposed to do. But yeah. Anyway, now what was I going to say? Oh yeah, I'm reading that book by Gary Teeple about like Marx's history of or theory of critique of politics, and in it, like Marx talks a lot about this idea of civil life versus political life, and and all the way through it, he's talking about like getting unity of getting things dialectically unified or whatever. And it would seem to me, I am probably being very imprecise with my language, but it seems to me like a very, very deep point of Marx is that you need both civil society to organize itself for communism, and you need to get the political element of society to do it too. And I just think so that to me is like why Marx is going so hell for leather against Bakunin for this idea of a political party, and it's why I think it's correct we should go for the party, even if we're going to run into a whole load of shit problems trying to figure out how to do it. I just thought I'd throw that in there before you two or three start going in about these theses. Okay, so let's hear Derek jump in.
Well, I just want to bring out how much conflation is going on here, and how I think this is pretty emblematic of talking about party across texts because so the Bolsheviks are talking about the Leninist party, or, you know, the like the Bolshevized party form. McNair in general has been talking about a Kautskian party, which is an abstraction from the Second International, and Marx, you know, it is talking about this broader form of party, and the definition that he uses towards the end implicitly when he's talking about to do so is to become a political party, even if you call yourself something else. Like that is a more Marxian kind of definition of party, which as he like, yeah, like.
But it's amazing how little
three
Marx
different
wrote about.
notions.
It is true, but when you read Marx, it is amazing how little Marx talks about political party. It comes up what 3 times, maybe, most of which in the Brumaire. That's really it.
Well, McNair is like aware of the difference between like Marx's definition of party and even like what the later Engels recognizes as a party because he's dealing with the SPD so much.
Yeah, I mean, McNair's I think McNair it does realize these differences, but he's not. Like I honestly think this he's not pointing out how until that very last paragraph how different these are. And then he says, well, you don't have to theses 1 through 3 are not, you know, are not dependent on theses 13 to 17 as he's already shown. Oh, okay, I got it. Except that for the Bolsheviks, they meant in theses 1 through 3 what was meant in theses 13 through 17. So he's having to decontextually read this to make those 3 theses hold up.
Yeah.
And
well, I think he's not happy about the the justificatory theses, and then has sympathy essentially for 5 and 7, or I'm sorry, what was it, 5 and 9?
Yeah, 5 and 9, and then he says 1 through 3 are valid, and then he brackets out 5 and 9, and this gets to 13 and 17 and says that they're basically not just not true, that they actually set things backwards. Okay,
yeah, they're inimical to proletarian rule. Like those justifications are like negate the class content of the party.
You and I have been talking about though how it's hard to figure out why so many people who read this come to such weird ass conclusions they do.
Yeah, it's making more sense now.
Like
reading this book.
Yeah, because trying to figure out what McNair means by party, even if you're being pretty strict delineating what he's saying, is not easy. Because you could read this and say, oh, he thinks the Leninist party form is fine.
Yeah, which is not what he means, but
it just needs to be more internally democratic or whatever.
Yeah. Right.
I mean,
but like, is that not a contradiction in terms, or, you know, like, how can it be more democratic? Like, how can you be an iron strict rule but be more democratic? Or like, is he just saying
I don't know, but I know a lot of people who believe it right now.
Are they literally just saying you allow factions? Is that kind of what they mean?
Yeah, I think that's what they
like.
Yeah.
But like, is that not just like, you know,
like a lot of them still believe in like open ballot vote and stuff too. So I'm like, oh, so factions, but factions that can be subordinated to the will of whatever dominant group is there.
Yeah, like it has to be, you know, I think that idea of open voting is very bad. On only trivial things, you know.
Yeah. You know what? Weirdly, Tom Alexi, I think I'm actually being convinced that Cockshot's critique of this has some teeth.
Oh, I think it has. I think sortition is I think that's, you know, it's eminently a scientific approach, if anything, you know, for how to actually reflect working class behavior or just everybody's behavior. Like, I think it might have, you know, difficulties and how it's implemented, but you know, or maybe you need to selectively implement it. You know, some things might be very difficult to do that way, but I do think that general approach is correct. You know, I even, like, before I read Marx or anything and the 2008 having, and I had all these kind of wacky radical ideas in my own head and thought, oh, I'm a fucking genius, and then realized, they were invented 200 years ago in much better form with a lot of theory. Is like I had an idea for like a kind of a sampling of populations for votes and stuff. It's a very fucking obvious thing to somebody who's kind of with a math background. I think it's no kind of coincidence that it's coming from someone like Cockshot.
Yeah, as opposed to a narrative historian like McNair.
Yeah, completely. And this narrative historian who sees this major character and this, and could they have chosen a different way? And it's like, God damn it, let's take a statistical and mechanical approach to governance. There's a lot to be said for it.
That's what I kind of don't like about this book, is that he kind of just gives way too much. He's kind of like way too much causal explanation to political organization. Like, sometimes I feel like he thinks history is... Huh?
Explain what you mean there.
Like, he kind of just explains all of history in terms of, like, the political organization. And, like, why history turned out the way it did. Because of, like, these political decisions that these people made.
Well, like, it is a very voluntarist, politically determinist reading of history, right? Like,
yeah, that's kind of what I don't like about this book, is how, like, yeah, it's like how, like, politically deterministic and voluntaristic it is.
Well, I understand that critique, and I think Marxists should, do well to have a broader read of the forces. I think you could tell this story in terms of, like, broader things outside of the wills of people. But the important thing about history is that at least it is experienced as actors acting, and like, I could tell a story about the productive forces in Russia and how that was going to bind all the choice there. But like, not everything is explained by that. Like there could have been a more democratic response to the failure of workers' councils. There's no economic law that determines that.
Well, this is why y'all motherfuckers need dialectics. That's all I got.
But I feel like it's kind of like, like there's...
Puya, is every book, is every history book not written, like even Marxist ones, like, is Marx's ones on, like, the Brumaire, are they not, like, written as well with choices and stuff in there?
Yeah,
but they are, but capital isn't.
Well, no, but Puya's right.
I kind of like to think about,
I'm
like,
just saying, like, this is a historical work, really, isn't it? You can't get away from it and just like say, oh well, there was 27% peasantry at this point. I don't think you have to combine the approaches.
It is a historical work, but it's also a historiographic work, and that's where things get a little bit more questionable, right? Like, because it does seem like McNair's trying to move this away from the idea that like, oh, Stalin, bad mustache man.
I kind of want like a probabilistic view of history. I kind of want it to be like we have like these conditions. I kind of like to think of history like we have these conditions, and these are like a field, and this field, like an electric field or something.
Yeah.
So you want Bainesian Marxism?
I want like, well, maybe not.
we gotta read Alan Carling. Yeah.
I kind of want like, their conditions are like this field, and then, based on how, like, think if it's an electric field or something, and like based on the voltage across the field or whatever, then we have a certain probability of something happening, something like that, but in historical terms.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, because what if the Bolsheviks had done the right thing and it still failed?
I want like somebody to go through like the empirical data that maybe the economic conditions and the political conditions that correspond to these, and this book isn't really giving me that, but I think he's correct in a certain way. I'm sure that these party organizations that he's talking about would have been more conducive to accomplishing world revolution, but I'm not sure if like I want somebody to explain why this didn't happen.
Yeah.
And what kind of conditions are make the revolution probable and like, you know, as like a, you know, in like the world system or whatever.
Yeah, Marx tended to talk more about you know, forces and relations of production in his political explanations, and like the, you know, broader like class compositions in in his political explanations. McNair is zeroing in on one level of analysis. I know for a fact that McNair also thinks in these broader ways, and his work more generally is characterized by a pretty deep engagement with, you know, class composition and like, you know, forces and relations of production. But also he does take, you know, legal forms and that sort of thing to be important. So I think like outside of this book, you'll find that he has of more explanatory things to say about that stuff. But he's just abstracting a lot of that away because of how disastrous the role of agency in the Third International really, you know, like was. Like there, in a way, he's making an argument that there was a big mistake here, and it wasn't necessitated by, you know, the big Marxist forces that we usually appeal to.
Well, I think the other thing that we have to deal with is you mentioned bound choice theory, but bound choice theory does indicate that there are choices, and I'll give McNair this. He does try to read these choices as bad responses to legitimate things that have happened and not as purely will. So even in this little chapter, you know, you have this whole explanation of like, well, the Soviets totally fucked up because they didn't think about the structure of the Soviet comms. They had to institute an institutionalized military and respond to that and maintain power. The Bolsheviks had to militarize their own ranks. That like once you have made that mistake, there really are only certain things you can do.
Yeah. Like I think that's fair. Like when I interviewed him, like he does, like, you know, he was talking about, you know, say about today's politics. He was talking about how there's like a kind of there's a bifurcation of kind of political choices. You know, you got the, you know, the kind of turn to right wing nationalism, and you got the Corbyn or Sanders movement, and you had these two, you know, things that the state of the economy and political life are pushing these two alternatives, and it's like, you know, it's up for grabs, you know. And I think that I think just I think when you get into this talking about like Lenin and the Bolsheviks and all that, you know, you know, you get I don't want to say just trots, like Stalinist you get a lot of people on and they think they'll have a justification for why everything ended up the way it did, and that's how it should have. And he's fighting back against that. And I think that's where the book comes from. You know,
yeah, I agree. I just want to justify Poya's slight, you know, dissent here, and that it would be nice to have some of this stated in probabilistic terms as opposed to absolute ones. Because I do.
Yeah, or maybe not like this should happen or this shouldn't happen. You know, like this did happen, and you know this is why it was. You know, I know what Lexi said. I understand what he's doing, but it's kind of what I don't. You know, I don't really think that, you know, it's an accurate way to like model history. But
yeah, I agree.
yeah, and yeah, I don't think it's like good science.
Yeah, the thing is that I don't know that this is trying to be good science. I know I sound like I'm talking out of both ends of my mouth on this one, but I actually see both sides. But it's frustrating, Puya, to me, because I see how you could. Go ahead, Tom.
Sorry, I was just going to say both ends of your ass. That's what.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. It's frustrating to me because if I take the politically determinist reading of this, which is easy to take, I can come up with some pretty messed up conclusions. About, well, I mean, I could basically just say all we need is party discipline with factions as opposed to not factions, and we don't need to militarize it so much. But it's still a vanguard party, and it's really ideology that's going to cause it to win.
Yeah, I kind of got that vibe from this book just a little bit.
Right, and I'm like, some of the problems aren't just ideological. And to be fair, I've read enough of McNair's articles on the Weekly Worker to know that he actually gets that, but that's not in this book.
Right. This is McNair intervening among Marxists that are just not going to actually change their mind about that kind of thing. He only really deals with Stalinism in up front. He does say a couple things explicitly, and then drops the bomb about Bonapartism. For the most part, you could be an anti-revisionist and read this book and be like, okay, see what you're saying.
I mean, I've actually noticed this whole tendency after people have been exposed to this book, and it's not just amongst people we know, to be like, well, why do you hate the techies, more than you hate capitalists and stuff? Like, we need to have some kind of objective unity against the right wing of socialism and capital. And I'm like, what? How did you read this and get this out of this? But I think you can. I don't think that's what he's saying, but I don't think it's excluded either.
I think Kyle just rolled in.
Hey, Kyle. This is Kyle from General Intellect Unit. Everybody.
Kyle. Hey, what's up?
How's it going, bud?
What? Well, you've just missed a whole lot of talking about toilets. They have a good half hour on communist toilets.
Oh, I didn't realize we were reading Zizek.
Oh, are you saying because he's crap?
No, he's got that famous famous skit about how the different toilets in different European countries represent some truth about ideology.
I actually was okay.
I think he's right.
Oh dear God!
You think he's right, Tom?
Yeah. Has any of you been to Germany at all?
Yeah.
Yes, I have. I lived there for a couple weeks.
Unfortunately, not yet.
What is wrong with German toilets? Germans have the worst toilets in the world. You go for a shit, right? And they have like a flat bit where your shit lies and it's not underwater. It's up. And so you go for a shit, it stinks the place out. You can't sit there and read or anything. You have to get the fuck out of there. So to Germans, they can inspect their shit after they do it. Before they flush it.
This is exactly what Zizek was talking about.
Man, they're the worst toilets in the goddamn world. It's fucking rancid. You do a shit, you got to get out of there immediately. It's fucking who pokes their shit with a stick? My God.
Well, you gotta see your bowel health, Tom. You gotta make sure it's all good. It's all good in the.
Wow, something about German engineering. I guess you're right.
I will spare you the talk of places I've visited in Southeast Asia where it was just a pit.
That's much better.
Ditch.
That's better than that.
Well, it was a wooden ditch built over a pig pit.
Yeah, I much prefer that than a German toilet.
You have to watch out for the pigs.
Bad after a while. The outhouses with that you squat and they don't have running water. Those are awful.
They're not as bad as, because at least the Germans they lull you into this sense of fucking cleanliness and everything. And the next thing you're sitting in the middle of a goddamn pile of your own shit.
I do remember this about German toilets, but I was not as traumatized by it as you apparently.
Tom, I promise I'll remember when I visit Germany that I'll think about your feelings about this.
I'm going to get a picture of a German toilet. Here we go. Let's see.
Thanks, Kyle.
Yeah, I'm glad I introduced this derail into an already toilet-focused conversation.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Look at that.
God.
Look at it.
Tom. We have to talk about the Third International, Tom. I'm keeping my mind on the more holy thing.
Look, I mean, that might be a metaphor.
That's a good toilet design.
Listen, we've. I think we need to turn the page. It's a bit much. Party states everywhere, Kyle.
Yeah.
This might be a metaphor for the party state. Let's move on.
This is the country that gave us the SPD, so
Yeah.
It's all connected.
Never mind. Sorry.
Shy's critique.
Yeah. Shiza. Now let's go. Hugh, like well, Kyle, we're gonna do a bit of reading of this. Can you see the screen wherever you are?
I can, yes.
Do you want to have a go and have a read of this paragraph then, and see how we get on?
Sure. The converse of these points is that in the transition to capitalist modernity, every state becomes, in a certain sense, a party state. A critical difference between the successful dynastic absolutists in much of continental Europe and the failed Stuart absolutists is that the Bourbon, Habsburg, and Hohenzollern absolutists made themselves prisoners of a party. The party which was to emerge, largely bereft of its state as the party of order in the 19th century Europe. The Stuarts, following an older statecraft, avoided becoming prisoners of a party. James I, Charles I, Charles II, and James II all endeavored to maneuver between the Anglican Episcopal variant of the party of order, outright Catholics, and Calvinist critics of Anglican Episcopalianism in order to preserve their freedom of action as monarchs. This policy of preserving the individual monarch's personal freedom of action destroyed the political basis necessary to preserve the dynastic regime. The result was a new sort of party state, the revolution state created in Britain in 1688 to 1714. This state was politically based on a block of Whigs and Revolution, Williamite, and later Hanoverian Tories, the Jacobites, who clung to the Stuart dynasty, and the Catholics were excluded from political power and episodically repressed. In the American Revolution, similarly, what was created was a Whig party state. The Whigs differentiated into Federalists and Democratic Republicans, but outright Tories were largely driven out of the society.
Okay.
Do we want to do the next one as well? Because it's
okay,
connected. Connected idea.
Yeah, let's do it.
The dialectical opposite occurred in Britain in the late 18th to early 19th century. Classical Whiggism was largely marginalized, and the state became, as it is today, a Hanoverian Tory party state, successively dominated by liberal Tory and conservative Tory parties, and since 1945 by conservative Tories and Labour Tories.
Okay. Does anybody want to explain what Whiggism is for people who don't know? Lexi.
I guess the easiest way to explain it, it's just like the classical liberal Enlightenment party. But like before, I don't know. How does it relate to like Jacobin like revolutionism though? My history on these sorts of things are a bit rusty. But what's interesting to me is that he's clearly using a pre-Kautskyan form of party when he's talking about a revolutionary party state in the late 1600s.
Yeah, but he used party here. Sounds like he means an ideological formation. I mean, because that's what it sounds like.
Well, yeah, I don't think that Marx would ever characterize it as an ideological formation. That's
what the party of order is, though. That's an ideological formation. That's not anything else. Otherwise, that statement's not true.
Well,
yeah,
isn't this like? I mean, is that even true though? Because the party of order is like a very sort of polyglot kind of formation, right? Like it's various groups who come together as the party of order. They may have separate ideologies between them. Like, yeah.
Right.
I don't think how okay. You got. I'm going to actually put some pressure on this. Define your fucking terms, because this is.
Oh, it's heating up in here tonight. It's heating up. Welcome to the war zone, Kyle. Welcome to the war zone.
DMX playing.
Yeah, the general intellect usually hasn't been subjected to Varn yet, so.
Only a matter of time.
So, anyway, my I'm actually really, I'm both fascinated by this, but I'm frustrated by what he could mean by party, because he says it's to the party of order, which means a coalition, right? It's a coalition of parties and their function is to maintain order, as opposed to the monarch as its own monarchical position, which was the classical like the late medieval view, both of which are absolutist. So that's the absolutism isn't the difference, and the difference is the party of order is like the monarchy has subjugated itself as to leadership of this coalition of things that want order. Why I say this ideologically though is that for that to make sense, order has to be defined. Like it's not just some it's not like an objective coalition for peace. Like there's some sort of ideological core there, and that's also true for like the de facto Whiggish parties removing. And then Britain becoming everybody's secretly a Tory, whether they admit it or not. They're just Labour Tories and Conservative Tories. Like,
could you define what you mean by ideological there?
It ideological here does not mean I'm not playing any like Althusserian language games. What I mean is basically there's an idea of there's some kind of overarching idea, a singular idea. I don't mean a platform. Is holding all this together. That is an ideological formation.
I'm just thinking here about, like, I may be thinking of the wrong example of the party of order, but I'm thinking about the way that Marx defines the party of order in the 18th Brumaire.
Right.
And it is really a kind of marriage of convenience that various political actors get forced into by the circumstances. In that text, and that's why I was saying it's kind of like variated. It's not like there are various ideologies within that alliance.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, this is the
clearly
point of objection to this reading of history, though, that I think is actually substantive. Is this is making that idea predominant, because the reason why the entirety of the Jacobite monarchs failed, including ones that actually ruled, was that they wanted monarchical freedom, and thus tried to like navigate various religious and class groups without committing to any of them, and that's I don't see how you how do you read that as not politically, like almost solely politically determined. I don't like that. That's a like if you read that without any, if you're bracketing all the material limitations out, even methodologically, you just came up to like, even if you're just doing it to make a political point, the point you're going to have to make there is politically determined.
To clarify, this is the claim that there's an idea form or a preference for a political form that suspends the class content of the state. Is that what you're getting at there? Is that a fair reconstruction? Because I don't know if he's actually doing that.
Are we getting caught up on exactly like kind of are we kind of getting caught up on parsing what he means by this stuff? Like it seems kind of, to me, kind of largely correct. I don't see the problem.
I also don't see the problem, and I don't want to fetishize the ideology of the Tories. You know, the Tories, like the Tory political project had a power base. And that's like the real content of the Tories. It's not like the.
But then that statement about the Jacobites doesn't hold true. If it's just if it's about abstract power bases and not what these people are trying to do, then.
But like, let's look at the English. Let's look at the Tory. Let's look at his idea here of the liberal Tory and conservative Tory, and then the conservative Tory and the Labour Tories today. Like if you look at both Labour and the Tories in England are 100% in favour of the state. You know, they're not like, it's not like the Labour Party is like a revolutionary communist party.
Now, or even arguing to
not.
get rid of the queen.
They
Right.
don't even do that.
Right, exactly. That's what I'm
Right.
saying.
Yeah,
They're
yeah.
arguing to get
So
rid of the queen.
exactly, yeah. So while they both are fully tied into and well up for the current political status quo as it is, and we just switch, the redistributing a little bit more, a little bit less, whatever, based on which party's in power. But they both are aligned with this state. We support this state.
But this
And
is a
they're the
political
dominant.
ideological reading of history. It is, and that's to me like
No, but we're talking about literally how the parties operate today. That's actually, they are in support of it. We're not just saying it's like that because these people support it.
all right. I'm going to ask you to turn off your empirical map brain for a second and actually use some fucking logic. What I'm saying is that if you read this way, what he is saying is the determining factor is a political formation based on a series of ideas.
No, I don't think so.
You don't.
I don't think so, Derek.
What is the monarchical freedom argument about? These historical examples are mentioned for a reason.
And look at the first
examples.
They're not. Okay, go ahead. I'm done.
Sorry, here, Derek. Come back. What are you talking about? I don't know so much about the Jacobite stuff, so I can't even talk about it. But I can talk about, say, how the things operated, say, post the Irish Revolution, and talk about how the party formations completely switched, totally changed. But if you want to look at it, the party formations were a function of what went on in the economy and in the material conditions of the people. It's not like people had the idea for these two new parties. They came out of the struggle, the economic conditions, and so forth. And I think that's the point he's making. He's not saying all of a sudden in political life in Ireland there was Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil, and that's just the ideas people had in their head. He's not saying that. I think that's just looking for an argument where I don't think he's trying to make that argument.
I got kind of lost in your conversation, but I think this might be an important quote, is in the first paragraph. A critical difference between the successful dynastic absolutists in much of continental Europe and the failed Stuart absolutists is that the Bourbon, these people, absolutists made themselves prisoners of a party, the party which was to emerge. So I think he's trying to make the claim that they were successful because of their party form.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and their relation to the party.
Did I annoy Derek so much that he left?
Yes.
I did, didn't I?
I believe that's
Seriously.
what happened.
Is that an actual thing?
I mean, I don't think that he's totally wrong to be critical of that way of thinking, but I don't know if McNair is saying that this is purely a matter of ideology. Because I guess what I'm reading underneath this is that the party state, the party systems that are emerging, have bourgeois class content. And so, yes, the fact that you have conservative Tories and you have Labour Tories are for the bourgeois state, in a substantive sense. And that's the class conversation going on underneath the ideological forms. Am I reading too much into this?
There's too much history being glossed in this section here, because when he's contrasting America to Britain, he's not necessarily saying that the British case excluded a more sort of classically liberal bourgeois movement. It's just kind of the expression of bourgeois interests in America is more directly, that kind of bourgeois liberal ideology. Whereas in Britain, it's a kind of weird compromise that happens with the existing aristocratic formations.
Well, I have a question that I'm coming back in now that I've stormed off in a huff.
Sorry, Derek.
Cool down.
I do. So, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say apologies. I didn't mean to piss you off. Even though I kind of feel like this is finally I got him to storm after 5 years of finally fucking broke his brain.
You Irish ass. Anyway, I'm gonna blame this on national character, just like Marx and Engels sometimes did.
That's what he would have wanted.
I blame it on the good times.
But in all seriousness, I feel like I have to bring, like, the reason why I'm doubling down on this is not because I think this is actually what McNair thinks, but I think that, like, if you just read what he's saying, that's the most logical conclusion from the examples he's given. If you take these kind of equivocations all together, and some, I don't want to just be like a nitpicky ass, but like I think in the large thing, what he's saying about ideological limitations are true, but the question is why? And if I was to read this and just have this in my head and not try to put a class analysis on what he's saying, I would conclude that the new ideology eradicates the old one for whatever reason, and that everything gets subsumed to that. And that is that's not just politically determinist, that's hyper politically determinist. That's almost authoritarian.
I think the thing about the party state is that it exists to suppress its like political and ideological opponents, right? So you get, for example, in America, Toryism is basically exterminated, whereas in Canada, it continued to exist because there was not a Whig party state in Canada.
Right.
Right.
It was a Whig Tory party state in Canada.
Yeah, exactly.
But what's interesting about this, though, let's break this. I want to go into this. How did America get rid of it? Because we didn't kill that many monarchists after what was the initial, insurrection.
No, definitely not. It's a very strange transition from Toryism to a kind of like orthodox Whiggism as like the dominant ideology that happens in America.
Yeah, it's like like I know that John Adams always got shit for kind of looking a little bit too monarchical, but they didn't even have to really like abolish it that much. Like it wasn't even like, other than banning it in the Constitution, like it's not like people were. I mean, even when, like, for example, someone declared themselves emperor, which has happened in the United States a couple times, everyone just treated them like they were crazy.
Like, could it be to do with the nature of, like, there's loads of land and small peasant getting the hands on the land?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, Emperor Norton. Go ahead.
I firmly believe that tradition could be completely different if George Washington decided to be king instead.
Agreed.
Of it. So, like, agency matters in history. It's a fact of history, and it's just a matter of consigning agency to its proper causal role. Like,
yeah, there's a weird reconciliation of the Southern elite with Whiggism that happens sort of provisionally up until the Civil War, and then it's on a new character afterwards.
Yeah, because people miss that the Southern slaveholding states were largely monarchist, even though there's just now this popular kind of liberal Maoist thing about how the monarchists were actually more progressive than the bourgeois revolutionaries because they were more against slaves. And I'm like, yeah, that doesn't make any sense because the slavers in the South were more aligned to the monarchy until the very end. Yes, Britain abolished slavery before the United States did. But it's just not like, some of that was actually contingent on what happened in the United States. And so, like, my smart ass comment, Lexi, earlier about y'all motherfuckers need dialectics. This is an agency contingency theology tension that I don't think is. I think, and I don't know that this is a flaw to McNair here. Like, it's a flaw in McNair's thinking. I think it's a flaw in the way this is having to be presented and having to be glossed. you could read this and take the exact wrong conclusion from it, or maybe I don't know if it's the wrong conclusion. Actually, that's the problem.
Wait,
I think it might be slightly clumsily written, this paragraph. This section and how he's explained it. It's quite it's quite, ideologically or idealist in its writing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, I think what we're choking on here is that McNair is behaving as a political scientist or a legal historian of some kind, and really just more of like a bourgeois political scientist, you might say. He is a legal historian, but but the way that he's writing this is only on the level of politics, and causation is discussed in terms of how it appears in political life. And so in the thing that the Althusserians do right is that they are forced to reconcile with anti-reductionism, that like at some point you have to deal with dynamics in a system as it appears, and you have to like observe what behaves like causality within the system, even if you have an idea that there's some deeper force at work. That's greatly complicated by the rest of the bullshit in that tradition, and they turn to like butthole psychoanalytic, like Lacan stuff to
and Saussure stuff.
Yeah, but
setting us back 100 years. But yes,
the point being that like you can talk about these things on this level, and you're not delivering a whole picture. You might say it's a half truth if you need the class analysis to always be there, and that I understand that.
Oh yeah,
but is agency is that even facts?
What do you mean?
Huh?
What do you mean?
Does that even exist?
Oh dear God!
I think it's an interesting philosophical question, Puya. That like,
well, it's not philosophical. It's kind of an empirical question. Yeah.
No, it's not.
It's empirically adjudicated whether agency. Well, empirically, Puya, agency does exist, unless you mean rationalistically.
What do you mean?
Well, like I experience agency, and so do you. Anyway, this is definitely philosophy. Trust me.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know, but
he's a neuroscientist. This goddamn neuroscientist. Right. Let's move along. I like what I kind of can we move along? I just find that this idea that he's trying to put over here, this idea of the political makeup of a state can be radically quickly changed, is an important, powerful thing, I think, for a unity of the left. If you think about it, for me, this would mean like, let's say you have a socialist revolution in the morning, one type of socialist kind of takes power or whatever, that the new politics would be like, I don't know, maybe communist state party types versus more anarchist types, or say some sortition types at other ends, and that's the level of the politics now operates. I find that like a very kind of uniting thing for the left, that's so split into their silly little, oh, you're an anarchist, oh my God, I'm a left com. I just find it like it's something that's we should use to unite action amongst leftists. But I just find it a very powerful idea. That's all I wanted to say before we go on. What do people think like of it as an idea? Like, I think it's very correct, and I think it's very powerful.
I think.
Go ahead.
I think it is an interesting idea in terms of like understanding how within like a political paradigm that exists within a country at a certain point in time, like I guess which would be like the intra-party politics. There are these like fundamental assumptions that are shared by all parties that are included within political decision making, and that just seems to track. I think my biggest problem with this particular section is that like For example, he talks about the formation of the party order, the party of order, out of European absolutism, and you could look at the French case there because that's the one that Marx points out. But then he just sort of like says, "Oh, and look at the French Revolution and Gaullism," and it's like there's this, the chronology is interwoven in reality, but in this analysis is split up, and that completely removes the causal element from what's going on. And I think that creates a lot of confusion for me.
Sorry, I was muted.
Okay.
Pui, you jump in there. Jump in.
No, I was just gonna just because nobody said anything, I was gonna say if we should move on. But if you have got something to say, you should say it before we do.
No, I'm finished. Derek, did you have something to say before we move on to the next little, like the next bit of this? Take that as a no. Somebody, I think Derek was like eating a bag of crisps.
I'm back.
Okay.
What I was about to say is France is instructive because France doesn't abolish, like, its revolutions don't abolish the like Gaullist party state doesn't the bourgeois revolution in France does not get rid of monarchism at all. And so like and why is there no like American, there is now actually, but historically speaking, there's no like American equivalent to Demestra, and I don't think that that's dealt with. It's just glossed. Like there does seem to be some big differences between some of these developments, and in some cases they don't abolish all the prior forms, and they still exist politically. In other cases they do. They just, like in the United States, you're right. There is no, like, even though almost weirdly, even like 10 years prior to the revolution, most of the revolutionists were monarchists. And then like after that, they're not anymore. It's just not even an open question. So I don't think this answers that clearly.
Okay, let's read this paragraph. Let me have a go. I'll mute Derek because he's having a fight with his headphones. Okay, the idea that political power can only be taken by a party or a party coalition, and that the resulting new state is necessarily a party state, does not therefore at all imply the tyrannous character of the party state created in the Soviet Union and imitated in many other countries. This tyrannous character reflects the decision of the Bolsheviks, A, to create Bonapartist centralism within their party, and B, to use state repression, ban on factions, etc., to resist the natural tendency of the party to split within the framework of the common party identification created by the new state form. Behind these decisions, as I argued before, is the fact that the Russian party state created in 1821 was socially based on the peasantry. Anybody want to comment?
Clearly, he has a class picture in mind behind these things.
Yeah, and it's stated here.
Yeah, so like I understand that maybe it's an incomplete picture, but is it wrong? And that's kind of the level that we should be arguing on, because it may be wrong, but I think that his argument has some very concise sense to it, which is why he leaves out so many details.
Like I said earlier, the only case, I agree with Kyle, the only case where the details really actually are disconfirming is the French case. All the others were just kind of being patents. But this is kind of interesting to me. If we go back up.
Oh, sorry. Yep.
If we go back up just for a second. So we have to remember that what he means by party is really not the common language view of party, or even the Kautsky view of party.
I think it's changing what he means all the time in different paragraphs.
That's maddening, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a Marxist tradition, Derek.
God. Like, I mean, when he says that the party has a natural tendency to split once it's stated its new framework, you can't be talking about like like you're not talking about the same thing as like a political party the way we understand it, or even the way Kautsky or the Bolsheviks understand it, right?
I think he just means in general, like even the Bolsheviks, like were, probably should have split, but instead they just banned the concept of difference.
Right, but they, I mean, I guess, yeah, because that's also what kills the left SRs and all that too.
Yeah, I think that's the thing is like when he says the Bolsheviks, he's actually talking about like the party state that was led by the Bolsheviks and then which the Bolsheviks subsequently purged of all opposition, and including within their own political party as we would understand it in the sort of conventional poli-sci sense.
Okay, let's go back. Extreme democracy.
Where are we at?
Suppose that we
fight for extreme democracy, as the CPGP has argued we should, and that in our party program a series of concrete measures to this end. The existing state fails, and some party or coalition of parties based on this aim forms a provisional revolutionary government. We proceed to reconstruct the state order along the lines of extreme democracy. The resulting state will be a party state of extreme Democrats, to the extent that an extreme Democrat coalition takes power. By doing so, it will become a single party and the parties within it, factions. The parliamentarists, or the rule of law party, probably composed of several labor, conservative, liberal, etc. factions, will be excluded from political power, just as the Jacobites were excluded from the political power in post-revolutionary Britain, Tories in the post-revolutionary US, and monarchists in post-revolutionary France. They will be excluded from political power in the same sense that Islamists are excluded from political power if they do not monopolize it. That is, their constitutional ideas will be subordinated to the extreme democratic regime and marginalized by it. They will quite possibly turn to terrorism and have to be repressed. But the fact that the state is a party state in which the minority which opposes the new state will be excluded from power, and if they resist, repressed, does not in the least imply that the party state cannot have parties or factions within it. A party state as a one-party state, complete with a ban on factions, expresses the class interests of petty proprietors, as opposed to the class interests of the proletariat. Suppose instead a single communist party takes power and creates a radical democratic state forms. It will be expected that this party, while retaining a common party identification in relation to the revolution and the state, will break up into factions over parties with common state within the common state party over major policy differences. All of this would be true with the names, and some of the concrete detail change if we replaced extreme democracy with all power to the Workers' Council and Council's party or coalition and a council's party or a coalition formed a provisional revolutionary government. Okay, there we go.
So if I took McNair's suggestion seriously here, we should not be forming a Marxist party, but an anti-constitutionalist extreme Democrat party. Am I reading this wrong?
Well, that wouldn't, like, he doesn't have anything in here about seizing, seizing the means of production, does he?
No.
Like, I assume that he's not saying we should just try and be Switzerland, Swiss canton or something, or Vermont. I presume that he's just taking that as a,
Yeah, there is a section in there that I think is quite important. I think if you go up a bit, we can go back to it. Yeah, so to the extent that an extreme Democrat coalition takes power, by doing so, it will become a single party, and the parties within it factions, and the parties there are in scare quotes. So I think like the picture here is of having a revolutionary agenda such as extreme democracy, and that bringing together a coalition of interested revolutionary parties in the very conventional sense, and in the struggle they will become a single party in the sense that McNair has been talking about the party state.
Because they have a fidelity to like a revolutionary idea, right?
Yes, exactly.
But it's like a singular revolutionary idea. It's not like a Marxist program. And that's actually kind of different than the way I've seen a lot of people who read this book go.
Yeah, and this is interesting because it's like very specifically addressing like the program of the CPGB at the time this was written, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And very much actually it's very specific to England. Like he's not kidding when he says that.
Oh, totally. This is all very much read through a British or English lens.
Right, because like if we were doing an anti-formation for extreme democracy, we would be opposing something different than the unwritten constitution and the monarchy. We would be opposing the Constitution itself.
Right.
And you're also right that except right now when things are breaking down in America, like that normally is super duper uber heretical, not even Marxists do it.
Yeah, that's where you see the contours of the actual like existing party, right?
Yeah. No, that's the implicit kind of constitutional regime of the American state. Like, yeah, it's a kind of party. Like,
so we need to.
It makes sense.
We want to sum it up. It's when Donald Trump said in front of the Senate or whatever, you know, we will never be a socialist. We'll always be a capitalist country, and everybody stood the fuck up.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
so now,
that's it.
Mm-hmm.
There it is.
Leads to the end.
Except Bernie Sanders, who was bending over. You know, probably because he had a bad back.
Yeah, except Bernie Sanders, who was bending over, and it's just, you know, it's like we have to have capitalism light.
Yeah, he was trying to get a Zimmer frame up.
But you know, he's loyal to the Constitution. Nothing about what he's saying is disloyal to the Constitution, and that's how the left normally is. Like, I mean, in the United States.
And what's fun? Yeah, go ahead.
I think you can also see these like sort of contours of like what McNair is talking about in the British case with all of the sort of like empty controversy about Corbyn not being deferential to the monarchy.
Yeah.
They goddamn hate that here. Like, they hate it. Like, anytime like he won't go to this state function or that one, or he won't like sing the national anthem, you know, the press goes absolutely bananas. It's hilarious.
That's an awesome power as a propagandist.
It is. And the weird thing is, I think like the Republicans in Britain, I think it's nearly 50-50. It's something crazy. Like, it's not like 1% of people. It's really quite normal. But it's unspeakable to be in Parliament or anything and not fucking toe that line.
Yeah, that's the peculiarity of British class society, right? That
it's still semi-feudal.
The divorce between the ruling class and the population at large is just extreme. And like what, you know, when he's talking about how the Whigs were basically suppressed in Britain, I think he's talking about the like, you know, what do you call them? The nonconformists and like the people who went on to be like the sort of like Whiggish socialists at Cambridge, like the, you know, like Keynes and that group of people. Or I guess you wouldn't technically include Keynes, but yeah, like that kind of radical liberal socialist tradition you find at the fringes of British society, which has no actual like purchase in the official politics of the country.
Well, yeah, I just looked up the stats on it in England. It's not as high as I thought, but it's 18% are Republicans, 75% are Royalists, and probably a huge amount of them are soft Royalists. You know, like, oh, they're good for tourism or some bullshit.
Right. So I had a conversation with Douglas Lane about this the other day, and I won't give the specifics because it involves people and controversies. But one of the things I said is the more you guys talk about what is imaginable, the more you give in to the current not just capitalist but the entire political order, because everything that you believe now is based on the system that currently exists now. And basically, you're thus if it is imaginable to you under the current system, you've actually legitimized that system. So talking about it being revolutionary in any way is kind of silly. And I wasn't actually making like the anti-parliamentary, anti-democratic point that a lot of people make, or like the MLs make, or whatever. What I was just saying is like everything that seems imaginable to us now is because it's within the current constitutional order or political order, or in capitalist order too. But I guess and McNamara would say it's in the current party order. Now, am I misunderstanding? So I say that because what I would use for party here is movement, but he uses that differently. So I'm not quite sure.
Really like
I think there's an important distinction there, because when he talks about the transition to the party state, the party comes after it's post the struggle. It's a product of the struggle.
So it's the concretizing of the movement, even if it's not concretizing in a singular political party. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but go ahead.
No, sorry. Go ahead, Tarek.
No, but it does seem to me like we have to be both more and less radical than at the same time in regards to this stuff if we took this seriously, right?
Meaning what?
Well, I mean, for example, like this pro-democratic, just not leading an insurrection and killing everybody is the way to power stance that McNair is taking here. But like, you do have to radically transgress some element of the current order. And it may even have to be simpler than like overthrowing capitalism, because we can't even agree on what that means.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that the movement would probably not agree precisely on what that means, and you would see that debated at the factions or the quote unquote parties that fall out of the party state, right?
Yeah, it's like something that has to be settled in the mix.
Right, but we'd all have to agree that this one element's fucked up.
Yeah,
and
you have to have enough core commonalities.
Like in the French Revolution, right? It's the abolition of privilege, right? Like that's the thing. That's the program you get kicked off on.
Like the American Revolution is probably getting rid of the British or the Irish one, or take your pick. The Chinese probably getting rid of the Japanese.
Yeah. Well, it seems like it seems like one of the reasons why nationalist revolutions would be easier to do is this would be easier to form around. And that's why this is in some loose sense what the ML argument that all the like national liberation revolutions are positive would be true, and in so much that they're easier to be revolutionary because it has a clearer agenda to which to build a coalition around. But those party states would be nebulous as fuck, because all you're building.
Well, and McNair would discount them as being all that valuable because he would associate them with a revolution of the petty proprietors.
Right. Yeah. Ugh.
Anyway, I think, look, we've been on for about, how long are we on for now? Well, over 2 hours.
It depends on if you cut the toilet talk or not.
That's the best bit of the whole stuff, Derek. That's the best bit.
Is it though? I mean, we just got to the class content of the petty proprietor, like dictator state. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, but we're talking about toilet with shelves here, Lexi. Shut the fuck up. Toilet with a shelf. Come on.
I'll tell you, Tom.
Put things into context here.
All right, we're gonna drink some whiskey and have an old-fashioned Irish contest.
I'm not sure why he says that it's a class interest of petty proprietors.
It's an old Marxist argument about like how peasant revolutions tend to go, where it's probably like in the Marxist tradition, it's usually like thought of in terms of classical like Chinese civilization, and the way that like there was a concept of the mandate of heaven, where you'd have a dynastic emperor, and sometimes they would just basically, in so many words, like lose the mandate of heaven, lose the favor of of the gods, and they would have to be replaced by a new dynastic emperor that has the mandate of heaven. And that is the way that those revolutions would tend to go. That, there would be an uprising, and it wouldn't really replace the form. It would replace the person at the top.
Right.
And
let's
it
have
would
the better
correct
king.
the system. It would correct the system.
The idea was having a better king as opposed to like just getting rid of the fucking emperor altogether. And there's a historical, element of that with like most peasant revolutions do end up recapitulating the power structures just kind of nicer. I mean, in the medieval period, partly, and the reason why it's considered petty proprietor, and he's saying petty proprietor here to not just to say like, oh, those dirty peasants. He's also like petit bourgeois and stuff would be this way too. Is that you have something at stake in the current society, so you don't really want to understrong it. You just want it to be nicer.
Mm-hmm. Well, you need somebody who can kind of act as an agent to redistribute property, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you're atomized, right? You're either, like, I guess in the case of the peasantry, it's like either you're atomized into like small collectives, or you form a mob with no capacities for self-rulership, right? Like what you see happen sometimes in peasant revolutions is that they will essentially promote even if it's like the most radical and you have a peasant ascending to the throne, it's like somebody is promoted out of that group to be the person who's going to do the redistribution. And I can understand this argument sort of personally as like a worker who is like very atomized, and whenever I look at politics, it's like I feel like I have no power in myself or the people around me to affect what is going on. But if some heroic redistributor, like a Bernie figure or something, comes up, and then there's like this wellspring of support that happens because it's like, oh, there's an agent,
or even
something,
or even a Donald figure. A Donald Trump figure. Which, by the way, not to pick on something else because we're ending up here. That when we talk about the moods of anti-politics and stuff, that's one of the things that I think is missed. Is a lot of anti-political moods happen in peasantry, but they end up just recapitulating the same power structures with a different head that more represents what may or may not be viewed as their immediate interest. And that's not really revolutionary. That's recapitulatory.
Yeah, but why does he say the Russian party state was based on the peasantry? He says he argued it before, and I only came in.
Well, I mean, it's just objectively true that the Soviets actually have more peasants than proletarian in them, because at the state of development the Russian Revolution happened at, like only like 12 to 14% of the population was proletarianized. Like most of the country was still peasantry.
Yeah, but in like the basis of power of the Soviets, probably the proportion of workers was different than in the total country.
Well, I don't know. I think one of the things that he points out early on, though, is both in the SPD and the Bolsheviks, the actual proportion of workers was always lower than people were comfortable with. While like the membership was mostly workers, it was a much smaller percentage of workers, and usually the workers were actually in the reformist wings. And that like he just admits that flat out, which is a historical. I've seen several books that kind of just take the like what we know about demographics and voting patterns and project it back and say that most likely seems to be the case.
Well, I know, like you're talking about replacing the head of the government. I'd like if you could take off Donald Trump's head and maybe like put like, I don't know, like a piano there instead. That'd be good. Or maybe like a
Yes.
curtain, a set of curtains, just neatly folded. Something like that.
Now
would be nice.
we've gone past revolutionary politics to surrealism.
This is what happens when the revolutionary discussion is overripe.
Oh man, you go full situationist.
Right then, let's go to the chat, will we, and say goodbye. Say thanks to the people in the chat, and then we'll sign off.
Thanks to most of them, anyway.
Yeah, we've had some transphobic stuff, so I had to put somebody in on the naughty step, on the timeout step there for a while. But we'll, boo, yeah, it's weird. Anyway, let's thank people who are here: Erica Whelan and Constantine,
Hey, Erica.
Olivia,
Hi, Olivia.
James Knight, Lexi
James.
Deluxe. Don't know who the hell that is. Stank.
Shrug.
I must say, I do like the name Stank. And that's my favorite name I've heard in a long time. We have our old LDS JKF and Fruit Snacks 500. Like, I think some of these people can't be really tuning in to this in all seriousness. Stank and Fruit Snacks 5000. My God. Who else do we have? We've got that's about it, except for the person who's banned, and they won't get their name read out because they're banned.
Boom.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. We're going to take this offline, and we'll be back next week, hopefully, with the second half of Chapter 7. We only have probably 6 more live streams to go. Before
Yeah. Only 6 more.
We've done 13, and we've done about 120 pages. Did we get to 120 pages exactly?
Yeah,
so 16.
Didn't one of you people tell me this was going to go faster than the climbing book?
Me. It was me. I was wrong. Okay, that comes up every week, and because there's lots of weeks, I've heard it many times. So I'm just gonna say that's true. You're right.
Lexi, would you like to tell us again how many weeks you thought we'd do it in?
Oh, maybe just like a month, really.
4 weeks.
Maybe 4. I mean, we could probably. There's not that many pages. We could just kind of, not go into as much detail as the Kleiman one because I don't know.
There's but you know what? Math, right? It won't be as
yeah. Math is the only hard thing in the world. Nothing else could be problematic. No, I'm glad that this has turned into a whole long, fun discussion series with diversionary side quests because this is a super important topic. It's really like crazy to chew on this in a vastly different context than when I originally read the book. When there are a lot of people actually thinking about this. And also I was frustrated by taking this book as a political strategy guide, but I think in general I agree with it as a work of like political science. Anyway.
Yeah, you could have just said the answer you could have given was just 4. I didn't ask for like a half-hour chat there. Yeah,
well, that's what you get.
What an asshole I am. Okay, well, let's say goodbye to everybody.
Bye.
Do we have a group goodbye? Bye. Goodbye. And we'll stop the broadcast. Go offline. Stop broadcast.